Oh yeah, do you remember that time that we absolutely ruined that generation because we just allowed them to have TikTok all the time? Let's not do that anymore.
The number one indicator for children and their intelligence and how well they do in school academically can be mapped almost from those years before they even go to school with their parents. And it maps almost identically with how much they read.
Yeah. Girls' mental health over the last sort of 10, 20 years has like gone so astronomically bad, and particularly in comparison to boys as well, which is still bad.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Point Podcast UK. Today we are here with Hayden and Dylan, who are primary school teachers, and they are the host of the Teach, Sleep, Repeat podcast, and also creators of some very entertaining teaching content, which I enjoy watching and listening to. And we're going to have a chat today about schooling and education, and get your guys' opinion and expertise on things and see where the conversation goes. So let's start off with doing little introductions, because this is my first ever podcast threesome. So this is a big moment for the podcast. So who's Hayden and who's Dylan for everyone listening?
Well, I'll start, shall I?
Go on.
Hi guys, my name's Hayden. I've been a primary school teacher for 10 years. I work in Margate. We were just talking about Margate teachers, apparently very popular. Before we went that, it's all goss outside of the pod, isn't it? Goss outside of the pod. Gossip. I'm here with Dylan. Go on, introduce yourself, mate.
Well, this is weird because normally, Ollie, I'm introducing us on the podcast. I'm the person who speaks first. So this is very alien to me right now.
Yeah.
A, you've spoken first, and B, like we're on the other end. We're like, waiting to be asked questions.
You gave me the power, and I bloody love it.
I wouldn't teaching is, because I'm not actually talking about teaching as such. I'm talking about sort of cultivating people. So do you guys enjoy that part? Is it just the academic side? It's the aspect that you get to contribute to their flourishing and growth.
I mean, I think it's the best bit.
Yeah,
to be honest with you, I think if you spoke to most teachers, at least primary, I know I don't want to speak for secondary because, like I said, it is a different world, and I just don't know. But I know a lot of primary school teachers, and I think the majority of them would say the best part of the job, the bit you actually enjoy the most, is developing them as humans holistically. That side of teaching, that is the bit. There is a nice win in the academics are great. They're measurable, really easily measurable. And, one day a child can't do a particular maths objective, and then 2 weeks later, they're really confident at it and they're happy about it. That's a great win. But really deep down, the thing that makes you feel fulfilled as a teacher and happy is the fact that they actually are happy now, and they feel good about that maths thing that they've learned. I don't really care, like truly, about the fact that they couldn't do a maths thing, then could do a maths thing. I care about the journey and the feeling and seeing them develop as a person.
Yeah, I want to develop on that slightly, because I think you've spoken about older children, and that anxiety can come through a lot more as you grow up and you become more aware, like you said, of your surroundings and the people around you and how you feel you need to behave. I think Hayden's absolutely right. He's hit the nail on the head in terms of, as a teacher, those moments are amazing, and we find those moments in the academic side of it as well. But I do think there is also a strand as a primary school teacher, especially lower down, early years, year 1, year 2, where the academic side is actually vital, because you're teaching them to read, you're teaching them to count. We're talking about in primary school, we cover the absolute fundamentals that you do need to strive and do well in society. As you move up the school, we're up a key stage. We teach 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. At this point, we're teaching them, can you cross multiply fractions? And I completely understand what Hayden's saying there. If they don't pick that up when they're 9, okay, they'll pick it up when they're 11, when they're 13. And do you know what? If they don't pick that up, they'll be an adult who doesn't know how to cross multiply. But will they apply themselves in another way? Of course they will. Will they be a functioning adult if they fall out with people constantly? Probably not. So, as a teacher, as someone who's fostering these children, what's going to be a bigger win? Not even just for me to feel good, which is a good byproduct of it, but for that child as they grow up, actually, them learning how to foster relationships with people is more important than knowing that D means 50 for Roman numerals, for example.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't.
L means 50.
Which it doesn't. I'm just going to make sure that stays.
And do you know what? That's why it doesn't matter.
Oh, wow. Good save.
Exactly. No, I mean, I didn't even know. What is cross multiplying? What does that mean?
So Hayden, you're the year 6 teacher.
Yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about.
When you flip fractions over and
Oh, I
multiply,
see.
yeah, not
Oh, okay.
Literally, we're talking like an abstract method to help a child solve an arithmetic question.
Yeah.
We're big on maths anyway, teaching, and we're not huge fans of like purely abstract teaching. We're big fans of teaching concepts and really making sure children fully understand like exactly why, even if it is a trick or an abstract thing, it's like, well, the reason this works and gets you the answer is because, we very much believe in going down that route and not just getting kids to pass tests by teaching them the abstract side only. It's like a surface level knowledge. That's another point.
Yes. No, it's because if you can't explain something to someone else, then you don't truly understand it, do you? So there are definitely things where we just know how to do it, but we don't really know. Well, we've committed to sort of
why it works.
Yeah, exactly. Automatic memory, but we don't really know how to do it. When you were talking about the reception and the key stage one is the importance of getting those foundation blocks in. That is so true. Actually, I never thought of it like that because, as you said, well, as we know, like from a developmental point of view, those early years we do our most developing at that point, and from a sort of brainwave state, that's when things. There's a saying someone said, "Show me the 7-year-old and I'll show you the adult," or something along that. And and I think that's true because those 0 to 7 years, with which almost half of, maybe not quite, but they're at school. At least in the UK, because they can go to school when they're 4, so nearly half of it are at the school. So there's a lot of sort of defamation around school of, oh, people aren't taught the right things, and why do I need to learn this? And I get that, especially as you get older. But what people kind of don't realise as such, which I didn't realise, it was because I listened to someone else talk about it, is that it isn't just about what you learn; it's about the sort of structural frameworks that learning about new things can put in your brain so that you can use them in different contexts. And
exactly that.
So you might learn a little pinpoint thing, but that little pinpoint can now help you address other ideas and bring them in together, which you wouldn't have been able to do beforehand. And that's what you guys get to do. What have you guys worked like? Primarily, you do upper primary, which fair enough, because I've worked in my brain. Just when I was working in year 1, it was so chaotic, and I actually struggled. Yeah, exactly. Like year 1 is probably more chaotic than reception, because maybe not, but reception they're so little that they can't really do much. But when they get to year 1, it's kind of like peak, that moment of sort of peak, what would you say, limitation, but also capability. So they're just sort of like
perfect balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Curiosity almost. They want to do everything.
So I can, if I was to go back working there, I would want to work with the year 5s, the year 6s, because the great thing about sort of that age range is that they're not teenagers yet. So when you like an 11-year-old is quite mature, and they haven't been sort of, I always thought that it's kind of like talking to a sort of mini adult, whereas once they get to like 13, 14, they're just a different beast. Like they're just so many different layers that you throw on top of them. Yeah, I said a lot there. I don't really remember where I was going, but
No. I completely, I'm going to come on a couple of things of what you said, because I completely agree with what you're saying. One thing I really wanted to say when we're talking about this, and we're teachers, and this might sound really self-deprecating here to our whole profession, but I do truly think that a teacher can only have a very small percentage push or change on a child, specifically academically. So we can bond with a child, we can have that emotional relationship with them, we can help them with their friendships, and we can see really big changes there. But when it comes to actually improving a child's intelligence, so much of those neural networks and those bonds like you talked about are formed even before school. So what you said about having a 7-year-old, you can see the adult, every single bit of research backs this up. And the number one indicator for children and their intelligence and how well they do in school academically can be mapped almost from those years before they even go to school with their parents. And it maps almost identically with how much they read. And it is as basic and simple as that. And as primary school teachers, if we say one thing to adults who are like, well, what can I do with my child? Can I push them into doing this? Should we look at the grammar and the punctuation? And do they need to know what a preposition does in a sentence? If they're not reading with their child for at least half an hour a week, at least, then that's the first thing they need to do. And I think those foundation blocks are so important and vital that as primary school teachers and as parents now, Hayden and I have 2 children under one each, we can see it now where, all we need to do with our children really is read and read and read. And it's just so powerful. That's the one thing I wanted to say about the young people.
Yeah, well, reading isn't just the fact that you're sort of academically, you're also cognitively facilitating some sort of the process and the development and the growth. And it's also what else is it? What was I going to say? The stories are just, stories are fundamental to being human. We perceive the world through a story. And one thing that I found interesting whilst I was working sort of with the younger kids is it doesn't matter, because I did an after school club, which was quite intense because it was pretty chaotic. But one thing that I found really interesting is it doesn't matter what they're doing, whether they're playing outside almost, whether they're playing with toys, any form of toy. If you pick up a book and start reading it in an animated way, after a while, they will eventually all stop what they're doing and come and sit around you and listen to you read. I mean, maybe the sad thing is I worry that may become less and less of a sort of regulating. This is something that we'll definitely get into. The emotional regulation of children nowadays is not, I don't think, what it was 20 years ago, even 30 years ago.
Like attention span, even
yes,
we've been teaching for nearly 10 years now. We kind of see it, but we're going off a lot of what experienced teachers say about attention span. It just, one of my biggest worries, maybe Hayden can expand on this a bit, and we've spoken about it a lot on our podcast, is I'm really worried about social media. And when we talk about phones in school, what we're really talking about is smartphones and the ability to be on apps. It's the idea of a child having a device itself is okay. We use iPads in primary school all the time for different reasons that are useful to their education. A child looking at a screen is okay if it's the right amount of time, if it's the right context. If they're watching and scrolling on TikTok and getting algorithms in their brain when they're that young and being almost, in my opinion, exploited by these big tech companies for eyes on the screen, that's what I'm really worried about. And Hayden works in year 6, and maybe you could say about how it's infiltrated.
Oh, and it had, TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp groups, things like that. All stuff that they shouldn't, technically they shouldn't be on when they're 10, 11 years old. Is just rife, absolutely rife. And I don't want to sound like a proper old
boomer alert,
going
boomer
mode here, because I feel like I am very aware of this. Right, I do think every generation, when they get to our age, does start to think, oh, the next generation down, they're just
skibbity toilet. What are you talking about?
Not like our days, was it? You look back and there's me with my goth haircut, doing all these other strange, weird versions of memes, whatever they were, when I was younger. Do you know what I mean? And I you just think actually it's just the same old stuff. And when I was young, it was the generation above me saying, "God, your generation,
how are we gonna cope when you grow up?
You don't have to go outside, do you? Always watching bloody TV. You don't have to
play on your PlayStation 2."
And I'm like, are we just falling into the same trap? And actually, this stuff doesn't matter. But even though I have that in mind, I do still agree, and I do think, particularly TikTok and infinite scrollers and stuff like that, are absolutely just ruining, rotting children's brains. They are so bad for attention spans, and just generally being interested in things, being horribly tired because they're addictive, and there's nothing more gripping than a 10-year-old's brain. Of course, it's going to get addicted to
and going
content.
down rabbit holes, seeing content not only they shouldn't see, but then being interested by content they shouldn't see. Maybe it's adult content they shouldn't see. Their brains are interested, and because they stayed on that reel for longer than 3 seconds, Instagram doesn't care. It's a 10-year-old on the other end of it. It just goes, oh, person watched this. Let's give them more of this, more of this, more of this. And we see it, rife in schools right now. It's horrible.
Yeah. And the sort of influence that like with my generation, it was, and I'm sure your guys as well, it was people like the Sidemen, and YouTube was really sort of blowing up when I was sort of growing up. And now they're obviously still popular, but there's an exceptional amount of micro-influencers, and there's just, not which isn't a problem, which there's just this vast array of people that you're exposed to so much content. And what I was trying to say, my original point is people don't realize how influential they can be to young people, and how their minds can be sort of swayed. And it's a sort of continuous battle of, because one of the things my dad used to say, because we talk about it quite a bit, or we did, maybe not so much now, is when you'd hear stats about children's mental health being so bad. And he would always say, and I didn't really get it when I was a few years younger, I was very opposite him. He would say, nowadays, children almost have too much choice. And that choice, they're sort of drowning in that too much choice. And it's, as much as they may feel more empowered, the negative aspects of that is they also feel slightly more destabilized or unstable. And I didn't really get it. I thought, I don't know what I thought, but as I've gotten older, I'm starting to think, actually, do you know what? That might be right. And there is a possibility that, I was just speaking about it earlier, the idea that if you allow children to be completely free and do whatever they want, the idea that they'll become sort of self-serving, stable, capable individuals isn't actually the case. They'll end up sort of semi-narcissistic and very unstable beings. What you have to do with children is you have to give them freedom, but in a controlled space, I think. And that's the problem, is who defines what that controlled space is. And that's
you're absolutely right. And like with it, like with the reels and TikTok and things, we can control so many things. Like if you think about a school, it's a very routine, controlled environment, really.
Yeah.
But you give a child a phone, you might even be able to control the apps they have. But as soon as a child's got access to something like an app like TikTok, even if the control is you can only go on for an hour, it's still within the confines of the app. There is it's that mad, overwhelming freedom, and it's so easy for them to, like Dylan said, just to consume all sorts of things.
No, it isn't just that children nowadays are dysregulated. I think parents are becoming increasingly dysregulated. We have a society that is managing, or it's trying to find its new path. There's the thing about any new ideology, change, is that regardless of if there's good intent behind it, every time you create something new, you inadvertently add a whole heap of layers and layers of potential drawbacks there's what is the law? It's called the law of unforeseen consequences or something, which is like every time you make a change, you think this will happen, brilliant, done, but actually you do that and then this happens. Or in some like mythological point of view, you've got something like the Hydra, which is a being that when you chop off one head, 2 more grow back. And it's a good metaphor for anxiety. That is, if you like, generalized anxiety disorder is basically the disorder of the Hydra, because if someone with generalized anxiety disorder, it's like a whack-a-mole. You knock one anxiety down and their brain just finds something else and jumps to it, and it's a nightmare. So sort of going on from that, in your 10 years, both of you can both give individual answers. How have you seen like the mental health of children? We'll do mental health of children, and then I'm interested to talk about parents, because I think parents are an exceptionally sort of contentious and possibly problematic part of teaching nowadays. possibly worse than the children a lot of the time in my experience. So how have you seen, I'm sure you've got horror stories, how have you seen children's mental health change over 10 years? We'll start with, let's start with Hayden.
Cool. Well, funny enough, we had some training. I don't know if you're thinking of this. We had some training fairly recently that just showed us a very simplistic graph of something to do with mental health. I can't actually remember exactly what it was tracking, but it was showing the negative effects of mental health and how it's changed over the years. And it was what really jumped out at me. It was very interesting. Was mental health of girls in particular, and it was in the teenage years in secondary school.
Yeah.
Girls' mental health over the last sort of 10, 20 years has like gone so astronomically bad, and particularly in comparison to boys as well, which is still bad. And I just I don't know what what we want to read from that, but
it was more that boys were in primary school as well, wasn't it? Do you remember?
Yeah, so more in
we're picking up boys easier than we're picking up girls.
Yeah,
essentially.
I thought that was kind of the idea we're coming to, wasn't it? That boys generally, boys with all sorts of mental health things generally present easier. Even down to things like autism. It's generally harder to spot in girls, just as a generalization. And I think it's the same, with sort of mental health. But then if you think about culture for girls,
precisely,
and again, social media amplifying culture for girls and makeup and looking good and glorifying all sorts of, I'm not even going to get into it, but just glorifying things that, just maybe cause a lot of anxiety for girls.
That makes complete sense because first of all, we know that women tend to be higher in trait neuroticism, which is like the personality trait. So they're more prone to anxiety and depression. And that does kick in around puberty. And when you've got that, and then you've also got the cultural, social media allows, if you imagine that toxic masculinity is sort of, as you said, brazen, in your face, out there, cantankerous, obvious. Toxic femininity is covert and it's deceptive and it's about sort of reputation destruction, and it's all these things are facilitated by social media. And the sort of feminine female social dynamics can be exceptionally brutal. So I can imagine that makes complete sense that young girls are getting mental health is increasing, and there's all sorts of things that are sort of attached to that and going on. Dylan, what do you think? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I suppose I'll come from it from more of an angle of primary school, I guess, in general, because I tend to teach a little bit lower down in school. And I don't think we could get through a podcast. Pardon?
I thought that would have been the case when I was chatting to you. I was like, Aiden's good.
Yeah, he's very much, on the cusp of secondary. So
year 6
in his ideas.
You're normally year 4, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm usually year 4. They're 8-year-olds when they come to me. And again, I don't think we can get through a podcast in 2024 without saying the C word. So I'm going to say it. But COVID had it had a huge impact. You got there. We're getting far enough away from it now where people genuinely go, "What's he going to say?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." Okay. So COVID had a huge impact, and therefore in mental health as well. And I think Hayden and I aren't specialists in this. We know we have a lot of friends. We've got a friend currently who's learning and diving into training to potentially change career. And she's going into early years and these neural networks and actually how it's formed at such a lower age. But we are getting children now in year 4, 7, 8, 9-year-olds who, when COVID hit, they were in those formative years. They were in reception. They were just before starting school. They were in year 1. Those years that we all say are vital to the development of children. And although, when my year 5s missed a few months of school, it obviously was a bad thing. But those year 5s were kind of old enough that they could be caught up. They came back at the end of year 6. They were in year 7, year 8. They're kind of old enough where they'd made them neural networks. They'd formed how to be friends with people. They'd been able to get through that. And we could kind of pick that up. And I think for the first couple of years, we found that higher up in the school, we could kind of fill those gaps. That was easier. Yeah, it wasn't so bad. We could deal with it. And a lot of people saying, no, this is awful. And we were kind of saying, it's all right, actually. But funnily enough, it's now. It is now in primary schools, in those years where they're 7, 8, 9, 10, where you think, okay, these kids were 4, these kids were 5, these kids should have been in school forming relationships with other children. These kids would have been learning how to spell, learning how to write. And alongside all of that, so academically wise, definitely seeing a hit, but socially as well. If you go out on the playground, children are more likely to be playing on their own. Children are more likely to have a shorter fuse if they don't get their own way. Why is this? I'm sure there's many reasons, but we can observe it and see. Is it because they only saw family through a screen for a year? Is it because they weren't around their peers? Is it because we've spoken about the role a teacher can have? Is it because they were at home in an environment which wasn't conducive to learning or development, and they didn't get the chance to have that escape? We talk about how schools are a safe place for children. We took that away for a few months. Did we have to do that? Probably at the time it was. I still think it was the right thing to do to cut the mess of COVID and stop the transmission. But we were saving an aging population, and whether it's right or wrong, whatever you want to say about it, that had an adverse impact on our youngest generation who weren't going to be affected.